Now we move on to chapter number 3, and we shall see who are the business partners of the depository. The first would obviously be the agents of the depository, that are depository participants. Depository participants are entities who offer the services of the depository to investors. Second are the issuers. Issuers are any entity that offer securities or issue securities to investors. Next are the registrar and transfer agents. Registrar and transfer agents are agents of the issuer, the way depository participants are agents of the depository. All the ancillary activities related to investor services like giving out corporate actions or sending annual reports are done by the registrar and transfer agents. Then we move on to clearing corporations. Every exchange has a clearing corporation which deals with the settlement of the securities on the stock exchange. And then we have the stock exchanges on which securities are listed and then traded. Next we see the depository structure. We see CDSL has depository participants as its agents, and it is the depository participants that offer the services to the beneficial owners or investors. Now an investor cannot directly come to CDSL and avail depository services. It has to approach any of our depository participants in order to avail the depository services. Also CDSL is directly connected to the clearing house or the clearing corporation of stock exchanges, because shares are settled in these clearing houses, and clearing members, or who we know as stockbrokers in the layman's language, are agents of the clearing house or the clearing corporation. Also there is a connectivity between the depository and the issuers and their registrar and transfer agents. So this is basically the depository structure. Now to tell you more about depository participants, depository participant has to be registered with SEBI under the provision of SEBI Depositories and Participants Regulations 1996. It is also bound by an agreement under the Depositories Act, and it acts as an agent of the depository as per the Depositories Act 1996. Depository participants offer depository related services after obtaining the registration certificate from SEBI. There is a certain net worth criteria that an entity is expected to maintain before becoming a depository participant. Now as you can see, SEBI says that for a stockbroker it has to be a minimum 50 lakh. So according to SEBI, in order for a clearing member to become a depository participant, it has to have a net worth of rupees 50 lakh. For a non-banking financial company, that is an NBFC, the net worth should be 50 crores, and for a registrar and transfer agent the net worth criteria is rupees 10 crores. Now apart from SEBI, the depositories also have their own bylaws, and they have their separate net worth criteria in order to admit entities as depository participants. Now as per CDSL, for a clearing member, in order to become a depository participant, should have a net worth of rupees 2 crores, and NSDL maintains that in order for a clearing member to become a depository participant, it should have a net worth of rupees 3 crores. The reason for this net worth criteria is that the value of securities of the beneficial owners of the depository participants cannot exceed 100 times of the net worth of the depository participant. So that is why net worth is required. Now we will see how the applications come to the depositories and how a depository participant gets its registration. Now the entity has to submit the application to the depository. The depository will evaluate the application, and if the application is incomplete, it will go back to the entity and ask for corrections. Depository will then forward the application to SEBI, and it has to do so within 30 days of recommendation. The entity will then pay SEBI application fees to the depository, and the depository will pass it on to SEBI, and that is how an entity will become a depository participant. Now there are certain conditions for grant of registration as a depository participant. First of all, the entity has to be eligible and has to have complied with the conditions stipulated in the SEBI Depositories and Participant Regulations. SEBI also considers the following: it should have an adequate infrastructure system, it should have enough safeguards in place, and should have trained staff. The entity should be a fit and a proper person as per SEBI. SEBI also examines whether the entity is open to keeping the interest of investors in its mind. There are also certain additional conditions, that is, the entity has to furnish information and details for a minimum of 3 years. So the directors or the shareholding pattern of the company has to be disclosed for the past 3 years. Also, the directors or promoters of the company should not have been convicted immediate preceding 5 years. The entity should not have been expelled, barred or suspended for the preceding 3 years. The entity is also expected to furnish the details of the board of directors, the authorized signatories who would be responsible for conducting the business of the entity. The entity has to appoint a compliance officer. The compliance officer is basically a one-point contact for the depository. Whenever any information has to be given to the depository participant, it will be given to the compliance officer. The depository participant is also expected to have adequate office space for conducting DP operations. Also, whatever operations are being conducted should be done in a safe and effective manner, so there should be enough infrastructure for that. Now, what is the validity of the registration certificate that the depository participant has obtained? The validity is 5 years from the date of issue. On completion of these 5 years, the depository participant has to apply for renewal. The renewal is dealt in the same manner as a fresh application is dealt. That is, all the formalities that the entity had to go through in order to become a depository participant, all these formalities are repeated. In fact, of late, SEBI expects the DP to renew its certificate only one time after 5 years. After 5 years, when the depository participant renews its registration, it will obtain a permanent registration certificate, after which renewal need not be done. What are the prerequisites for depository participants to commence their operations? On receiving approval, the depository participant has to apply for connectivity. So it should have connectivity with the depository in order to carry out the DP operations. At least 2 of their officials should be trained. In fact, when the application comes, CDSL also trains 2 of its officials. Therefore, 2 of the officials of the DP would have got training and would be certified by CDSL. They should also procure the prescribed hardware and software as mentioned by the depository. The applicant has to enter into an agreement with the depository, after which the DP ID of the depository participant will be activated, and once the DP ID is activated, the DP can commence with the depository services. Now, what are the rights and obligations of the depository participant? Whenever a DP opens an account or admits a beneficial owner with itself, it has to sign an agreement. It is known as the DPBO agreement, which has a standard format as prescribed by SEBI, and this agreement has to be signed before opening the account. Only foreign institutional investors and international multilateral agencies are exempt from signing the DPBO agreement. Securities should be transferred through client instructions only. That is, the client should come to the DP with a delivery instruction slip, or it should have given a POA in favor of its stockbroker. Only then should securities be transferred from the account of the beneficial owner. Also, transaction statements are to be delivered to the beneficial owner. At least 1 physical copy in a year should be sent to the beneficial owner by the depository participant. The depository participant should all times maintain connectivity with the depository, and it should also monitor, review and evaluate its own internal systems and controls. Also, it should reconcile its records with the depository. Also, a depository participant is expected to submit periodic reports to SEBI. That is, it has to submit the audited financial balance sheet along with the net worth certificate in a format prescribed by SEBI to CDSL, and it has to do so to the depository, and it should do so by 30th of September every year. Also, an internal audit report should be submitted on a half-yearly basis to CDSL. Any complaints received from clients of the depository participants should be resolved within 30 days. That is as per the DPBO agreement, and it should also inform the depository about any complaints that it receives from its beneficial owners. The depository participant is to indemnify the depository for any activities carried out by the depository participant. Also, there is prohibition of assignment unless the depository is consulted. The DP is also expected to pay for insurance. Its services should be insured, and there is a common insurance platform which a DP has to pay for every year. The DP is also expected to maintain a record of its services that it is providing to the beneficial owners. The depository participant is also expected to follow the guidelines of the Prevention of Money Laundering Act and its rules and guidelines issued by the Government of India and SEBI. It should also appoint a senior management executive as a principal officer under the PMLA Act. The depository participant should monitor any suspicious transactions and it should report it to the Financial Intelligence Unit of India, and it should also report to the depository of its suspicious transactions by the 7th of every month. DP is also expected to maintain and preserve its records for 10 years as per the PMLA Act. DP is also expected to ensure integrity and take a backup of its data. Suspension of certificate of a depository participant. Suspension can happen if the depository participant has contravened any provisions of the Depositories Act, the bylaws, agreements or SEBI Depositories and Participants Regulations 1996. It can also be suspended if it has failed to furnish the information relating to its activity as a DP, or it has not furnished or furnished false or misleading information. In case the DP has not cooperated in inspection, investigation or any inquiry made by SEBI, then it might be suspended, or if it has failed to comply with any direction of SEBI that the SEBI would inform via its notices. Also, if the depository participant fails to pay the annual fee, it can get suspended. Now, there are certain things that can also result into the cancellation of a depository participant certificate. What are these? If a DP is guilty of fraud or is convicted of an offence involving moral turpitude, or if a DP has been guilty of repeated default as specified as per the provisions of SEBI or the depository, then its certificate can be cancelled. A DP has its own bylaws for termination and suspension for depository participants. In case a DP wants to close down its operations, it has to inform the beneficial owners 30 days prior to the closure. When the depository is informed about the closure, the depository ceases to provide any service or act for the DP. The depository also notifies the depository participants, other DPs and the beneficial owners of the DPs and SEBI within 7 days and informs them about the closure of this depository participant. We move on to clearinghouse. Clearinghouse is an entity responsible for clearing and settlement of trades done through recognized stock exchanges. It is also responsible for admitting, clearing and settlement of securities. Therefore, in order to do this, it has to maintain electronic connectivity with the depositories, because electronic settlement of securities take place through the demat account. A clearinghouse is admitted as a user after entering into an agreement with the depository. What is the admission criteria for a clearinghouse or a clearing corporation? First of all, it has to maintain adequate software and hardware. It has to operate in such a manner that it ensures payment against delivery or guarantees settlement. It should also redress the grievances of its clients and the depository participants in respect of its operations in relation to the depository. A clearinghouse should also have the operational capability to provide the services. A clearinghouse or a clearing corporation shall not open beneficial owner accounts for clients except with the permission of the Reserve Bank of India. It can constitute an SGL account facility to the investors. Now, what is the eligible criteria for an issuer to get admitted into the depository system? First of all, an executive committee or the securities committee of the depository determines whether the securities are eligible to be admitted in the depository system. Also, the issuer or its registrar and transfer agent has to comply with these following conditions. It should undertake to cooperate at all times to redress grievances of the clients or of the depository participants. It should maintain adequate hardware and software as prescribed by the depository. Also, whenever an issuer wants to admit itself with the depository, it has to sign a tripartite agreement. That is, the issuer, its registrar and transfer agent and the depository has to sign on this agreement. If all the above conditions are fulfilled, then the issuer is admitted by the depository. The above conditions, however, would not be applicable for securities issued by the central or state government, that is government securities. So here we complete chapter number 3. Would anybody have any questions about this chapter?
I am having one question.
Yes, sir.
Is it mandatory for a DP to appoint a compliance officer?
Yes, it is absolutely mandatory for a depository participant to appoint a compliance officer, because he turns out to be the one point contact for the depository.
Okay, and within how many days a DP has to resolve a investor complaint?
Whenever an investor complaint comes, the depository participant must resolve it within 30 days.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks.